You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 11th of August 2026 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead, as the crisis in the Middle East continues to affect shipping, the wider global cargo map is also changing, with Germany and South Korea looking to new routes. Then,
the Hungarian people are fed up with the corruption, with the lies and with the propaganda. And the Hungarian people are fed up with the government, with the opposition, and they would like to have a complete change.
That's Hungary's new Prime Minister, but can a complete change avoid using the same methods his predecessor Viktor Orban employed? As a new president is set to be appointed, we'll ask how Hungary's institutions are being rebuilt. Japan is considering limits on foreign workers. We'll speak to a foreign worker in Japan to find out if this is really about numbers or the country's attitude to becoming more diverse. We'll be in Bangkok with our Asia editor as two shootings rock the city, and we'll look through the front pages and then get a roundup on the latest from Ukraine, giving you news from the front lines and the diplomatic front too. And as Europe prepares to go dark, can an eclipse shed some light on better public design? That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Turkey's parliament has approved landmark legislation designed to advance the peace process with the PKK, establishing a legal framework for the group's disbandment after 4 decades of conflict. Vietnam has begun building its largest domestically produced anti-submarine warship as Hanoi strengthens its defence industry, while Australia and Vietnam have agreed to deepen their strategic partnership. And passenger trains are running between Finland and Sweden for the first time in decades, restoring a cross-border rail connection between the two Nordic neighbours. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, 3 very different shipping stories are exposing the vulnerabilities of trade between Europe, the Middle East and Asia. In Germany, water levels in the Rhine are now so low that one of Europe's most important freight routes could effectively be split in 2. Meanwhile, South Korea is preparing its first commercial container service to Europe along Russia's Northern Sea route through the Arctic. And, of course, the trouble continues in the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea, severely impacting international shipping traffic through the Middle East. Well, I'm joined now by Victoria Mitchell, who's an analyst at Control Risk Maritime Security Team and an expert on the law of the sea, and by Monocle's Gulf correspondent, Inzamam Rashid in Dubai. And, Inzi, if we could start with you, what is the situation now regarding shipping in the Middle East?
Good morning, Georgina. Well, look, this was usually a strait where around 140 ships typically transited through that waterway. 20% of the world's oil usually goes through the Strait of Hormuz. And over the last 5.5 months, given Iran's de facto control over that waterway, targeting vessels which aren't abiding with its regulated routes, with the US naval blockade in position as well, shipping traffic has dropped dramatically. During the kind of height of the military action in this war, we were seeing usually 1 or 2 vessels pass through the waterway. Now it's averaging around 6 or 7 vessels. The latest data that we've received, that on Monday, it was around 6. When the memorandum of understanding was signed, remember, between the US and Iran in June, that had increased sharply. But given that this war is still very much continuing, that Iran still claims to have control over the waterway, that US naval blockade is still enforced as well, shipping levels are considerably lower, and countries in the Gulf are trying to figure out different ways to export their oil and also get goods in and out of their countries.
And what are those ways?
Well, the UAE in particular is working on a number of different methods. Just yesterday, the oil company, the sovereign oil company ADNOC, was suggesting that they could build yet another pipeline that would effectively bypass the Strait of Hormuz. So you have different ports opening up, which would mean less reliance on that waterway, particularly here in the UAE. And then, of course, you have Saudi Arabia, who have the other strait, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which was always there to effectively bypass the Strait of Hormuz. And that, of course, now has been targeted by Iranian backed Houthis in the in Yemen. And so, of course, they are now potentially controlling that waterway, and we've seen shipping reduce there too. Saudi Arabia, a huge exporter of oil, as we know. So there are troubles in two waterways, particularly in the Gulf, but Gulf countries, particularly the UAE, are trying to find different methods which would mean less reliance on this waterway in the future.
Thank you, Enzi. If I could bring you in now, Victoria, how serious is the situation in Germany's Rhine?
Yeah, good morning, Georgina. It's a record low levels in Germany, and also, of course, the river runs right through into the Hook of Holland in the Netherlands, where I'm talking to you from. And what this means is that barge travel for a key inland waterway has been severely reduced. That can be, for example, vessels needing to be a fraction laden than their normal volume, something like a third or even a quarter, or businesses dependent on the river needing to access smaller vessels with a lower draft, which enables them to use these reduced waterways. At any point where this happens, there will be an increase in delay and disruption and cost. And then as the impact on the water levels becomes more and more severe, the number of options and alternatives available to use of the waterway just reduce further. And what we can see in the last weeks has been that where possible, different options have been available. For example, an increase in access to rail and road transport for some goods types. But these are also limited by the fact that not all goods can make that switch from water transport onto alternative routes. So as things continue, as the water levels reduce further, we can see an increasing severity in the impact on the use of the rivers and the various supply chains that are dependent on this route.
Let's have a look at South Korea now, because Seoul is viewing the Arctic. Why is this Northern Sea route now commercially viable?
It's not commercially viable in the same way as other routes. Why the Northern Sea route is of increased interest, particularly to Asian economies that would like to reach European markets, is that there is a significant time saving of up to around about 10 days in transit time if you utilize the Northern Sea route as opposed to the usual Suez route. And that's a massive commercial saving for many Asian countries. And that's why it's of clear interest. It's also of increased interest as we see geopolitical complexities along these choke points, as your previous speaker has mentioned, around the Houthis in the Bab el-Mandeb and the southern Red Sea. This makes it more of a strategic imperative to identify a diverse supply chain. However, the Northern Sea route has always been and remains a different and a challenging operating environment. It is navigable for fewer weeks of the year, and specialist vessels are required, increased crew training to operate there, and the complexities of operating in the different water type because of the presence of ice and the need for icebreaker capacity, things like this, all are acting as constraints on increased usage of that route. But nonetheless, what we see with the South Korea story, which you mentioned, is an effort to do a sort of proof of concept, a demonstration of the capacity to operate there, with a view to increasing usage, if possible, in years to come.
But surely Moscow has considerable control over that. How much control does it have, and what then would be the legal obstacles to making this work, given sanctions and all the rest of it?
Absolutely. So there are clear geopolitical complexities for using the Northern Sea route, something which was immediately addressed by South Korea back at the beginning of this year when the trial was announced. Plans for trial were announced, was that the negotiations would need to be undertaken with Russia about how access and use of the route would be enabled for South Korean vessels. And companies that are looking to use the route will always be taking this into account because of the compliance risks of operating along a route which is largely controlled by Russian authorities, as Russia holds the largest Arctic coastline and operates along that entire route.
So China's also increasing its use of the Northern Sea route. I wonder then if Russia could become the gatekeeper of a significant Europe-Asia trade corridor.
Russia's presence on the Arctic coastline and its presence as a coastal state means that it will have a role in use of the North Sea route. That is absolutely clear. China has been a long-term user of the route, but this has been a lot of Russia-China trade rather than route right through to Europe. China and any other countries that use it would be necessarily needing to work with Russian authorities as they use the route, not least for pilotage and for icebreaker requirements, which are necessary to utilise the route themselves. So for clear operational considerations, that will be a factor in any planning for companies planning to use the route.
And Inzi, if I could just end with you, when we take stock of the impact of war, of drought, of melting ice on commercial freight, how much could the map of global shipping change?
Well, look, I think this is, as we've pointed out this morning, not just an issue in the Middle East. It is global, and whether there are different factors impacting it, I think what countries will find is that they will have to politically and diplomatically become more strategically autonomous and effectively have to figure out what works best for them to export and import their goods, particularly when we're talking around oil and in the Middle East. And that's what I'm seeing with conversations that I'm having with senior government officials, particularly here in the Middle East. They're working around the clock to try and find different ways that will effectively benefit them economically when it comes to trade as a country. And so I think we'll find similar situations across the world, whatever the issue is that's impacting shipping lanes around the globe. And I think this is important because when it comes to trade and business for countries, particularly like the UAE, where I am, they are heavily reliant on their oil output. They're heavily reliant on doing business and trade with other countries. And if they can't rely on the shipping lane nearby, which they've done for so many years, because there is now conflict and because another country, a neighboring country, is threatening to control it for the foreseeable, then they have to work out other routes. And that's exactly what I think we're seeing and we will see in not just the Middle East, but across the world.
Inzi, thank you very much indeed. That's Monocle's Gulf correspondent, Inzmam Rashid, and speaking to us from the Netherlands, Victoria Mitchell, an analyst at Control Risk Maritime Security Team. This is The Globalist. It is 8:14 in Budapest, 7:14 here in London. Hungary's parliament is expected to elect a new president on Tuesday, and the choice sends a very clear message. András Baka is the former Supreme Court chief who was forced from office after challenging Viktor Orbán's overhaul of the judiciary back in 2012. Now, after 16 years of Orbán, Peter Magyar's new government is installing Baka as the head of state as it sets about rebuilding Hungary's institutions. I'm joined now by Alexei Koryalov, who's Monocle's Vienna correspondent. Now, Alexei, you went to Budapest following this drama. Tell us more about Baka and why he's such a significant choice.
Well, good morning, Georgina. Yeah, so, Andrzej Baka, he is, of course, a symbol of everything that went wrong with the previous government, with the government of Viktor Orban. And of course, a symbol of this radical change that Peter Magyar and his new government are enacting. And indeed, this is just one of many, many things that Peter Magyar's government has been doing. I mean, he's been busy dismantling the system built by Viktor Orban ever since he came to power this spring. Because, as we saw, of course, there'd been widespread anger over falling living standards, public services were decaying, there's widespread government corruption. All of that led Viktor Orban's Fidesz party to this crushing defeat and to the election of Peter Magyar. And, he's been really busy dismantling that system. And, in speech after speech, both before and after election, that is something that Magyar has promised, nothing less than a complete reset, a complete system change.
So, I mean, Fidesz, the right-wing opposition, says that Magyar is using his supermajority to dismantle the old order as much as Orban used his to build it. How does Magyar avoid repeating those methods?
Indeed, I mean that is one of many concerns that have now surfaced about Magyar. I mean, indeed, even on election night, I was there in Budapest on election night and saw all the jubilation and this incredible joy. But even amid all this jubilation, there were voices of doubt. People. I've spoken to some voters. I spoke to some voters on the night, and especially the younger people, they were quite wary of Magyar and his style, because indeed it reminded them of Viktor Orban himself. And as we know, Magyar famously kept a portrait of Viktor Orban in his childhood bedroom. And he, of course, was part of the establishment, of the Fidesz establishment, before he sort of broke away from that and started his party TISA and then started this sort of revolt against Orban. But indeed, there are similarities, and people are wary of this because he is using populist language. He is dismantling this system with such vigor that even Orban himself and his Fidesz party are now accusing him of authoritarianism, which is the irony of ironies, of course. But this is what we're seeing. But, Magyar and his allies are saying that this is the only way to get rid of that system, because Orban's system of government, this corruption, this system of cronyism, and all of that has gone so deeply into Hungary, and it's so embedded in its economy, in its political system, in its local government administration, and so on, that the only way to sort of get rid of that is to really just uproot it all at the same time in one fell swoop.
And how much patience do voters have for this?
Well, what we're seeing is, Magyar's approval ratings are still through the roof, basically around 70%. There was a slight mishap just recently. So as Magyar was sort of pressuring the previous president, Tamás Suluk, to resign, already then there were questions about whether this is constitutional or not. And then, of course, finally, when Suluk agreed to resign and signed a constitutional amendment to that effect, and then sort of the field was open, and then Magyar proposed a few people of his own choice that he would like to lead the presidency, and of course one of them was Judit Polgar, the chess grandmaster from Hungary, one of the few women grandmasters, who politely declined. But that led to people accusing Magyar of basically pressing his own liking on the people, and people didn't like that. Which then, his government opened this up to basically a popular online poll, which then threw up some interesting names, such as I don't know if there's this famous meme of this sort of slightly older gentleman who has this painful smile on his face. And it turned out that he's a Hungarian. His name is András Arato. He's a retired electrical engineer, apparently, from Hungary. I didn't know this. And this meme is called Hide the Pain, Harold. So he was one of the choices. He was one of the people's choices for the presidency. So, it was all a little bit sort of confused. and everything, until, of course, then the government nominated Andras Bakker, who is, by popular consent, he's probably the best candidate to lead the presidency here.
Alexei, thank you very much indeed. Alexei Koryalov there, Monocle's Vienna correspondent. Now, still to come on the programme.
Then you flew your Learjet up to Nova Scotia to see the total eclipse of the sun.
Carly Simon's 1972 hit You're So Vain references the total eclipse of the sun, which crossed parts of eastern Canada in July of that year. And if you're in Nova Scotia tomorrow, you'll witness a partial solar eclipse peaking around 3 p.m. In Europe, some areas will experience totality. And later in the show, we'll be speaking to an eyewear designer in Beijing who can advise us how to view it safely whilst looking good. Even when the sun goes dark, there's no harm in being a little vain about what you're wearing to view it. This is The Globalist.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, and obsessive attention to detail. With UBS's Chief Investment Office House View, we're focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals, so you get the big picture broken down into thought-provoking insights. Delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Let's continue now with today's newspapers. Joining me is Vincent McAviney, journalist and Monocle Radio regular. Good morning to you, Vinny.
Good morning.
You're looking very sparkly today and fresh.
Well, yeah, I was at Glyndebourne yesterday, actually. It was a lovely summer's day.
Which
here.
opera?
Tosca. The principals were brilliant. I didn't really like the staging. It was sort of 70s drab Soviet-y style. Didn't quite make sense. But yeah, brilliant principals. And if you've never been, it's a lovely day out in the English countryside. You sort of take picnics and bottles and have a good time.
Yeah, she falls off the thing at the end.
Well, she
of the
doesn't.
bus, doesn't she?
No, they just shoot her.
Oh.
Which didn't really make sense. We were all expecting her to run off this thing and sort of dive off to the back because there's sort of this mound where they've been putting bodies, and they just shot her. So it was a little
because famously in productions of Tosca that go wrong, the singer jumps off the thing and then you see her bounce back up again. I have actually witnessed that happening if the repertory players in Harari.
I'm wondering if maybe at some point in the season they've done it and there's been an accident. And that's why they've swapped it to shooting. But yeah, it was a little surprise. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, opera, of course, high drama, lots of power struggles and so on. And that's exactly what we're seeing happening in Washington. The Telegraph is running a photo that is, well, it spells trouble for Donald Trump, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting not only that this meeting happened, but this photo came out. I think this is a sort of warning shot across the bow of J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio. But also, I think it is the start of a wave of soliciting donations. This is a cabin in Woodstock, Maine, owned by Tucker Carlson, the former Fox News presenter. I also got to say former Dancing with the Stars contestant in America when he was at a low point in his career. It's well worth watching the video of him doing dancing on that. He was voted out first episode. But it seems he might be wanting votes for something else. There has long been rumours that he would be running for president, that he's interested in doing this. He has a massive reach, even though he's not on Fox News anymore, got fired over the Dominion voting scandal by Rupert Murdoch. But he has a huge reach across social media platforms and YouTube. He does huge shows. And he has had a gathering including some very famous previously MAGA-aligned names, big supporters of Donald Trump, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, her husband Brian Glenn, who was a news reporter for One American Voice. He was the guy that sort of, heckled Zelensky over his suit, and others. And I think this is a meeting of people who are potentially going to launch some kind of run to take over the Republican Party and maybe have Tucker Carlson as the next president.
That's quite extraordinary. I mean, the paper's saying that it probably couldn't happen, but certainly might split the Republican vote.
11 years ago, Georgina, we sat in this very studio and I would feel sometimes the back item, I'd pick a Donald Trump running for president because it was a novelty and we said it won't happen. And lo and behold, as that year went on from 2015 to 2016, it became more and more serious and it went from the fun last item that we did to the top item, and it feels like this could be the start of that.
Yeah, well, here he is at the second item now because he's been hiding in a freight truck in an airport.
Yeah, I mean, I think he stole this from Taylor Swift, who would sort of be wheeled into her concert in a special sort of janitor's van. This is, and we'd actually talked about this. You and I had talked about this when he went to Ankara last month now for that NATO conference. He flew in on the new Qatari gift jet, which we knew had a lot of adaptation inside, but didn't have the defensive procedures that it kind of needed. So that's sort of hardwiring the electronics in case of an EMP blast, and also having those sort of flares that shoot out if there is a projectile fired at it so that they kind of hit that rather than the plane. We then knew that there had been an issue because he'd started again the war in Iran. He'd flown back on, we thought, the traditional Air Force One, which has all that. But no, it now turns out, according to reporting from the Washington Post, which the sort of Times has picked up, that actually they put him into the older Air Force One and did that on camera, but then took him out of it via some kind of service trolley down into a truck, took him to a US Air Force plane and secretly flew him on that plane to the UK, where they then all swapped onto the new Qatari plane and flew back to America. So this was all quite an elaborate ruse. But what is interesting is it's one of the very few times it seems the American public have been deceived about the location of the president. Because even after 9/11, when George Bush was flying around in Air Force One, they said he was in an undisclosed location and revealed where it was later. They didn't put out a false location. So this is quite an interesting little story, and also raises real questions about the sort of Qatari jet. And again, how safe is he on that plane if he's not safe even on the real Air Force One?
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about one of his predecessors, because here's the thing. I have one skill, and that's broadcasting, and I have one area of knowledge, which is literature. And this man, who could do anything, he has been president of the United States after all, is taking on that job. He is doing a podcast about books. Thank you very much, Barack Obama.
I'm afraid so. But, anyone should check out Meet the Writers. It is a fabulous archive of Georgina's work with her passions colliding. But yeah, former US president launching a book. It's called A Great Book for Audible. It's going to initially be a run of about 6 episodes, looking at books. And we all know he puts out book lists every year of what he's enjoyed. But this is looking at the sort of 6 books that he thinks have really shaped his worldview and thinking on society. It includes the likes of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy by John le Carré.
Let me just jump in there, because if Barack Obama is going to give me anything, it's a chance to plug Meet the Writers. If you like John le Carré, you must listen to Meet the Writers with Nick Harkaway, because Nick is John le Carré's son.
Yes, and they wrote The Pigeon Tunnel together.
And Nick's just come out with Carla's Choice, which is the continuation of George Smiley's story.
Series.
He's got another one coming out in November called The Taper Man. The next book on the list is James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. And if you're a Baldwin fan, then you must listen to my interview with Nicholas Boggs. He's just released this 800-page biography called Baldwin, A Love Story, and he gave me a lovely, lovely interview about that.
Well, Georgina's got it covered here at Midori House, so I think Barack Obama's not gonna face an easy ride. What's interesting, though, is little thing here. I know for a fact from Obama's biography that he didn't read the le Carrés. He talks about when he was at when he was a state senator in Illinois, they were the book tapes that he would buy because they were really long, and he would listen to them. And this is a dispute in my house.
There's no shame in that.
I think audiobooks count as reading, but my partner does not agree with me on that one. But it's interesting. I think actually this is interesting. I think this is very time before the next election, because for Gen Z, who are kind of too young to remember Obama, and they see it as a bit cringe, because they're so into books and book talk, I think this is him reintroducing himself to the next generation.
You could be absolutely right. Just one more book that he is going to cover that I want to mention, and that's Marilyn Robinson with her book Gilead. I met Marilyn recently in Oslo, and my interview with her is out on Meet the Writers.
And that's not a sort of Handmaid's Tale thing.
It's a dying Iowa preacher's letter to his young son. It's very quiet. It's devastating on on faith and mortality, really. And the other thing I just want to tell you is that I've written an August reading list for Monocle, and it's online now. You can find that on our website. Vinny, we're almost out of time, but I have to just ask your opinion about this child who forced an entire flight to be cancelled because he refused to wear a seatbelt or indeed sit down on a Canadian plane.
Yeah, it's interesting because once you read down, there are reports from other passengers that apparently he was incredibly scared and kept slipping as well underneath the seat and hiding. Now, it's really obviously difficult because you do wonder why the child and the family just simply weren't removed from the plane. Actually, the airport was one of those restricted ones where it couldn't fly after midnight. But you've got to think, if it's your child's first plane ride, or even if you know that they've now developed some kind of fear, you've got to kind of do the work before the journey. Don't just get there and think, oh, I'm sure it'll be fine, because you're impacting dozens, if not hundreds, of people's they had to
stay overnight.
Yeah, they had to stay overnight. Their sort of on-board plans were sort of ongoing plans were sort of ruined by this. So I think you've got to do this. My suspicion on this is, and forgive me if I'm wrong on it, is, but it's less so Canada. This is Canada. The US, I think the reason you see so many videos of air rage and passenger rage and all this stuff happening, I think Americans just aren't used to travelling together. They use far less public transport than the rest of the world. And when they are suddenly forced to do it in a plane, which is kind of the most compacted and rule restricted, they sort of bristle at it and struggle at being in those shared spaces together.
I'm not going to say anything about corporal punishment. I'm not going to say how the child should have got smacked, anything like that. And nor are you, Vinny.
No.
Vincent McAviney, journalist and Monocle Radio regular. Thank you. You're with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. And here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Turkey's parliament has approved landmark legislation designed to advance the peace process with the PKK after 4 decades of conflict that have cost more than 40,000 lives. The law establishes a framework for the group's disbandment and the reintegration of some former militants. Vietnam has begun building its largest and most sophisticated domestically produced anti-submarine warship as Hanoi expands its own defence industry and reduces its reliance on Russian equipment. Meanwhile, Australia and Vietnam have agreed to deepen their strategic partnership, including cooperation on critical minerals, semiconductors and other clean energy. And passenger trains are running between Finland and Sweden for the first time in decades, restoring a cross-border rail connection between the two Nordic neighbours. The service reconnects their rail networks and makes it possible to travel by train from continental Europe towards Finnish Lapland. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. It is 13:32 in Bangkok, that's 8:32 in Zurich. Bangkok and its surrounding districts have been shaken by a grim run of violence. On Friday, a 14-year-old boy killed 7 people before taking his own life. Yesterday, a former MP was arrested after a local official was shot dead at a government office. And police are pursuing charges over last month's devastating Bangkok bar fire, which killed 37 people. Well, I'm joined now by our Asia editor, James Chambers. He's now back in Bangkok. It was a brief visit here to Midori House. James, it was lovely to have you in studio. You're back home now to really quite bad news. What do we know about the school shooting?
Hi, Georgina. Yes, it was a bit of a double tragedy on Friday and then yesterday in Nonthaburi, which is the province just northwest of Bangkok. The shooting involved a 14-year-old teenager. They're still piecing together what happened. He shot himself, so the police won't be able to ask him why. But there are no obvious causes of it. I mean, his friends, his fellow pupils, suggest there wasn't any bullying. He was actually quite a well-behaved boy. He went home after school, wasn't hanging out with any bad types. Yes, he was under some school pressures apparently, but nothing out of the ordinary. So in that, I mean, the guy's dead now, so it'll be, guesswork, I guess. But obviously in the shooting that happened yesterday, the shooter is very much still alive, and he went on TV to basically tell everyone why he did it.
And why did he do it?
Well, the shooter yesterday is a 71-year-old former MP, Chalong Rio Rang. He's he's called this type of politician called a cobra in Thailand, and these powerful people who jump from party to party to try and get a seat. His most recent party was the party of the Prime Minister, the Bumjai Thai Party, but he failed to get a seat in the election. And yesterday he went to see a local government councillor in Nonthaburi, and he suggested it was because of an unpaid debt. He called this person, Tong Chai Yen Prasad, who's now deceased, his friend, and he said back in 2008 he lent him a lot of money to help him with an election. And the sums being talked about are about €250,000 or even more. So it's a considerable amount. And he's saying that he went to him yesterday to try and get that money paid back all this time later, because he needs it now, because he's uses all his money on his health, because he has some blood-related issues. He confronted him. Tong Chai, I guess, refused to speak and tried to get away in his van. The shooter suggesting that it was the driver of the van who pulled a gun on him, and that's what prompted him to shoot and kill his so-called friend. And then immediately after, he called a TV host and confessed during a live stream. And that TV host, basically told him to stay put and wait, and then called the police, and he was arrested.
James, briefly, how prevalent is gun ownership in the country, and how much pressure are these two shootings putting on Thailand's gun laws?
Well, this has raised this, shone a spotlight on the amount of guns that are in Thailand. It is very gun heavy. It's got the most gun ownership in Southeast Asia. I guess what this is now going to focus attention on is the rules, because there are different rules for who can own a gun, and then there's different rules for who can carry a gun in public. And the Prime Minister, Anutin, is actually one of the biggest advocates for cracking down on guns. And in 2023, when he was Interior Minister, he actually suspended everyone's right to carry guns in public. So since then, you've not been able to walk around in public with a gun. So there'll be a lot of pressure on him now to deliver on a lot of what he said on Thailand's kind of strict gun laws.
And James, finally, we know that police are now seeking charges against the owner of the bar in which 37 people died in that senseless fire last month. I wonder, with that now back in the headlines and these two shootings, what the mood in the city is like right now.
Yes, well, it's very traumatized. People are in shock here. We've had a huge fire and now multiple shootings. People are going to be asking what's next. With the fire, I mean, the venue owner has been charged, as you said, with 6 offences, including reckless arson causing death. But he's still in hospital right now. He's still in intensive care. So the police haven't had a chance to interview him. They have been talking to over 200 witnesses, and I'm sure they'll have a very strong case against him. And alongside that, they've been essentially inspecting almost 1,000 venues across Bangkok. And I've seen the teams go in, and they inspected nearly 1,000. Only a quarter of them were cleared. The rest either had to do some modifications, and over 100 were forced to close. So that shows how serious the issue is in Bangkok, and how much these venues will need to improve if they're going to attract customers again.
James, thank you very much indeed. That's our Asia editor, James Chambers in Bangkok. This is Monocle Radio. It is Mountain Day in Japan, a public holiday devoted to the country's spectacular landscape. Although, with a major typhoon approaching, getting outdoors may not be terribly appealing. Japan is also facing a rather more predictable force: demographics. Its population fell by 470,000 last year, while the number of foreign residents rose to 420,000. Japan needs overseas workers, but on Friday, the government launched a debate about whether it should start limiting their numbers. Gendel Gento, a contributing writer at the Japan Times, joins me now from Tokyo, where he is one of those foreign residents. Gendel, just before we start, there's a major typhoon heading your way. How are things looking?
Oh, good morning there. Well, I'm looking out my window right now, and just now the rain is starting to pick up, and also the wind. So, yeah, I would love to be talking to you right now from a mountain somewhere, but it's not possible, sadly.
So how are the Japanese people spending Mountain Day if they can't go outside?
Right, that's a good question. I mean, actually, today is the national holiday, but like this week, the whole week is like a week-long holiday that happens every summer called Obon, which when people go back to their hometown with their family to actually remember their ancestors, right? To pray for their ancestors in a way. So it's kind of similar to Dia de los Muertos in Mexico. So a lot of people are actually not in Tokyo because so many people who live in Tokyo are actually from elsewhere in Japan. So they went back to their hometowns this past weekend, right? So they're actually probably at their home with their family, just staying in and spending time with them.
Yeah, so I mean, very few people in offices today, but for the foreign workers keeping more and more of the economy growing, do you think Friday's announcement should be a concern? What exactly is being considered?
Right. This is something that Takaichi, since her administration promised for as a campaign promise, there has been a lot of worry about this increase in foreign workers. So what you were mentioning before is like the discussion is finally starting about putting a cap or something like that in the number of foreign residents, but it's still very unclear how they are planning to do that, right? This is actually not a policy of Takaichi's party, the ruling party per se. They are actually not enthusiastic about putting a cap on the number of foreign residents because they are very pro-business and in a way beholden to the business lobby. The businesses in Japan obviously do not like this talk because they are suffering from a severe labor shortage. So this policy is from the coalition partner of Takaichi's party. It's like a smaller conservative party called the Japan Innovation Party. They are the ones who are kind of pushing this policy on, and Takaichi has no choice but to accept it because they are the reason she was able to form a government back in the day, the first time when she became leader of the government.
So, I mean, for you and people like you living in Tokyo, what does it feel like as a foreigner working in Japan? Is there a difference between useful to Japan and being accepted by Japan?
Yes, I mean, it feels, for me and for people who have been here for a number of years working, we have been kind of planning our lives based on the rules that were already in place, right? For example, for permanent residency, Japan used to require just, living here for a number of years, having enough, money to support yourself and being of good conduct, right? But now they're pulling all these new rules and measures that feels like getting, having the rug pulled from under your feet. So there is like a feeling that this is like very unfair because supposedly they're like targeting bad actors, people who are abusing certain loopholes or something like that, but it's affecting everybody, right? So to answer your question about there is a difference between, being useful to Japan, being accepted in Japan, yes, it's becoming like a big difference between the two. Like before, as long as you're useful to Japan, you are a worker in Japan and you follow the rules, that used to be enough. But now there is like this resurgence of this idea and this emphasis on having, being of Japanese descent or something like that, right? So these things have always been separated. If you remember, I know I'm talking about a long time ago, like the first time Japan started considering bringing in foreign workers, the first thing they did was look towards the Japanese people who left Japan a long time ago, went to Brazil, for example, right? So the first thing they thought about was bringing in the second generation and third generation Japanese, the Nikkei, as they called, from Brazil, because the idea that they were Japanese in a way was going to make them assimilate better in the country or something like that, right? So that was the first thing that they thought about.
Gandalf, foreign residents make up just 3.2% of the population. I wonder why it's such a political issue. Is this something to do with Japanese society or perhaps just the party that's driving this being uncomfortable with the idea of diversity?
I think it is. It is definitely. And, Japan has never been, let's be honest, never been very comfortable with immigration, for example. if you look at the Japanese government, they don't even call immigration by its name. The Japanese government official position is we don't have an immigration policy, right? Even though there is very much one in place. But the thing is, in recent years, foreign workers have become more visible. They're still, as you say, a very small part of the population, but there is, in recent years, many foreign workers in positions that are very visible for people. For example, going to the convenience store is very rare these days to go into a convenience store and not find at least one foreign worker behind the counter, usually a foreign student working there part-time or something like that. So because this has become more visible, there is a lot of also misinformation in social media by, kind of bad actors who are using this situation as a way to say, Japan is being invaded by foreigners, etc., coupled with a couple of, smaller parties of the far right that also have risen to relevance in recent years. There has been some tensions, as there always are. One of the tensions that's usually in the news a lot recently is the Muslim population. In Japan, about over 99% of people who die are cremated, right? Muslims are not, their religion does not allow them to be cremated. So there's a lot of tension about finding places to bury people, right? For foreign people who do not want or cannot be cremated, for example. So all these things that are usually very small, very localized, are being blown out of proportion, especially on social media. Recently, with the earthquake you probably heard about in Kumamoto, right? There was a big earthquake. There was an explosion in a mall. There was immediately fake news saying that there were foreign people looting the mall. It was false information, things like that. So all of this has been, real issues, real tensions that might exist. They look towards America and Europe as well and don't like what they see, So probably there's a lot of, there's a confluence of all these things happening and then being blown out of proportion by a lot of,
well,
false information.
Talking about being blown out of proportion, we're going to leave you to batten down the hatches now and get ready for that typhoon. Gendel Gento, thank you very much indeed. Gendel's a contributing writer at the Japan Times, and this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
IQ, EQ, and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Well, it's time now for us to get an update on Ukraine's war with Russia. I'm joined by Olga Tokarczuk from Yasynia, the west of the country. Olga is a Ukrainian journalist and a contributor to publications including Time and an Academy Associate at Chatham House's Ukraine Forum. Olga, it's lovely to have you back with us. I wonder if you could tell us more about this story. It's in the Kyiv Independent. It's about the outcome of Ukraine's 40-day campaign of strikes deep inside Russia.
And thank you for having me. Yes, indeed, Ukraine is discussing the results of a 40-day campaign, influence campaign, as it was called by the President Zelensky, who tasked the Ukrainian secret services, the SBU, with making it possible so that Russia changes its mind on the war, to kind of persuade Russia to end the war. And that influence campaign entailed the long-range strikes that Ukraine has been doing in this past 40 days on Russian both military but also logistical targets deep inside the country's territory. So according to the statement that the Ukrainian Secret Services published, the results of this campaign is that more than 100 strategic targets on the Russian territory were hit by Ukrainian forces. That includes Russian military objects like air defense systems, missile launchers, but also that includes Russian oil refineries and oil production facilities, and as well, and probably most importantly, and that's a significant difference from what Ukraine has been doing earlier in the war, Ukraine has been also targeting Russian logistical facilities, so-called Russian Amazon warehouses of the company called Wildberries that supplies dual-use goods that are also used for civilian as well as military use. And in that way, Ukraine also managed to bring the war closer to ordinary Russians, because these strikes, a lot of Russian small businesses were affected by them. The strikes happened in many, many locations across Russian territory. And Ukraine is saying that this campaign is not going to end after 40 days. So its official expiry date was on August 4 last week, but Ukraine is saying that it is going to continue. And another result is that Crimea has been really, really heavily targeted. Crimea is a military launching stage for a lot of Russian attacks on Ukraine, and Crimea has experienced one of the most severe fuel shortages among like all Russian or Russian occupied regions, and it also experiences 24-hour-long blackouts, and as well, Russian military supply chain in Crimea has been severely disrupted by these strikes.
And finally, let's just have a very quick look at Zelensky's unexpected visit to Serbia, because that caused quite a diplomatic spat. Why?
Exactly. Serbia is one of the most pro-Russian countries. According to some opinion polls, 71% of Serbs, they support Russia in its war against Ukraine. So Zelensky's visit was caused a lot of controversy, and it caused one of most pro-Ukrainian countries of the Balkans, Kosovo, to take down the large Ukrainian flag it had on the main street. And the reason was that Zelensky made a statement supporting territorial integrity of Serbia, and there has been a lot of speculation. Why did he did it? And the interpretation that Ukrainian media gives is that Ukraine is interested in Serbia continuing to be a supplier of some Soviet era or Soviet style weaponry to Ukraine, which is done via the EU countries. So Serbia sells them to the EU countries, and then they provide it to Ukraine. However, this diplomatic tension is really high, and there are a lot of like questions inside Ukraine. Was it really worth it?
Olga, thank you very much indeed. That's Olga Tukariak, who is in Yasinia in western Ukraine. And you're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Tomorrow, the Sun, Moon and Earth will line up for Europe's best solar eclipse in 27 years. The Moon will pass directly in front of the Sun, with totality visible across Greenland, Iceland and parts of Spain and Portugal. Elsewhere, much of Europe will see a very deep partial eclipse, with the sky noticeably darkening as the Moon moves across the Sun. And with millions of people looking up, there is the rather important question of how to do it safely. Well, joining me now from Beijing is Sylviane Reynaud, the Director of Production at Laboratoire SBS, which produces certified eclipseware. Sylviane, just before we start, I seem to be talking about the weather with an awful lot of people, but Beijing, you're expecting record rainfall. Is it already tipping down there?
Yes, it's... let's say, like usually in China, when we have like heavy rainfall, it's much more than what people can expect in Europe. So yes, we can have a lot.
Yeah.
There is a lot of typhoons that smash to China again and again.
Yeah, I mean, the reports I'm reading say you'll get 1/3 of your annual rainfall over the next 24 hours. So I hope you're somewhere that's very covered. What do people misunderstand about looking at an eclipse, Sylviane?
Yeah, the biggest misunderstanding is that like people expect that because the sun is quite covered, and because the sun, like most of the sun, you cannot see it, that it will be fine for the eyes. But in fact, it's totally not the case. Even if there is only a little part of the sun that is visible, it can have a big impact on your eyes.
So what exactly then do eclipse glasses have to do?
The eclipse glasses, in fact, they are like specialized, made to look at the sun. So they will filter like the light, the UV, and all the things. So it's really their design made in order to watch the sun. So they enable you to watch it safely.
So just explain the design process to me. Are they designed differently from an ordinary pair of sunglasses?
Yes, totally. Yes, they are totally different. It's like a totally different product. Like the sunglasses are just made for you to dimmer a bit the light when you are outside and watch. Fine. But the glasses, now they all follow new ISO 12312-2. And they are designed specially to watch at the sun but to watch a direct observation to the sun. And the luminosity level is like incomparable. Because on your daily life, you never just look at the sun and watch directly at the sun, and you don't spend hours watching at the sun. So it's like very, very different product.
Do you remember the eclipse in, 1999?
Yeah, I do remember. I was in Paris at this time, and I even took the RER, like the train, support train, to go further north in order to catch even better the eclipse, and I jumped from the train to watch it. It was like a memory I won't forget.
I watched it in the Zimbabwean bush. It was extraordinary. But what were you watching the eclipse through then?
Yeah, I was watching through glasses, like the same glasses that you can buy in pharmacy or in a different place that are specially made to look at the sun. But to be honest, I don't know what was the quality of the one I used in 1999 because the standards, like the new standards that are used at this time, did not exist.
So tell me then how eclipse glasses have become much better designed over the intervening time.
In fact, when we say design, we should not think about like the design, the fashion part of the design, that it look good or things like that, because that's not the goal for the lunar eclipse. The goal, when we speak about design, the goal is like really to protect the eyes, is the safety first. It is like the only things, and of course that you can wear it comfortable. At the cheapest price, if possible. So it's really a question of protection of the eyes. It's really a question of this certificate, of this ISO that I spoke before. And it's really a question of how much it's filter, like anything that's coming from the sun that can harm you.
But surely it's still got to look good beyond just protecting the eyes.
Of course. There is, after different glasses, because there is like the lens to protect your eyes, but all the other part is a cardboard. This one can be printed with a different pattern, with different color. So after it's each producer that choose the design they use. Usually it's often linked with the eclipse.
Do you think then, Sylviane, that can designing for an event like an eclipse lead to better products for the public more widely?
Yes. As I say, like for us on our side, what is really important is like the safety. So really the design is focused about the usability, the safety. Also, now we push to have more instruction to explain to people how to use. There is and also traceability. So what's important is also to be able to know when it has been produced, by who it has been produced, and to be able really to follow the process and to make the safety.
And how much of a demand is there for eclipse glasses? I mean, it's not a stable market, is it?
Like really, is really big demand. There is a really huge demand, and we did produce a lot and import a lot in France. But in fact, we should have import more because there is a huge demand, like many people want. But the difficulty it is that many people think of it and want it like just at the last moment and buy it at the last moment. So it means that many people importing this product, they are not sure until the last moment if they will sell or not what they have imported.
But surely the demand will knock off completely after tomorrow.
Yes, but the demand will be at the last point of sales. But the last point of sales need to buy it first from the supplier, from the importer. So there is a whole process behind it. So in some place, I advise people, if they want sunglasses, to go first and to not wait the last day to buy it, because otherwise they might arrive to one place sold out, another place sold out. So it's better to right now go buy it if you need some.
Sylviane, thank you very much indeed. That's Sylviane Renaud, the Director of Production at Laboratoire SBS, speaking to me from Beijing. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers Angelica Jobson, Tom Webb and Desiree Bandley, our researcher Nkele Martin and our studio manager Lily Austin, with editing assistance by Hunter Wang. After the headlines, there's more music on the way and The Briefing is live at midday in London. The Globalist returns at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.